Good morning, everyone. We are so glad that you are here. This is the third week in an ongoing series during Advent on how to wait and to watch and to really mark our time well during Advent. And so the gift that we have here at St. David's that is so rare is to have a center for spiritual growth. And so if you don't know much about that, our two speakers today will be able to share more about that. But we have with us two of our spiritual directors, people who are both retreat leaders and bloggers and educators, people who have a deep passion for walking alongside people in their spiritual journey. So it is with great joy that we have Amy Dolan and that we have Lee Murray with us here today. And they'll talk a little bit about, we're actually spending some time with Henry now, and so that'll be the continuation. So we invite you, if you're comfortable, to just come and draw as close as you can. Thankfully, some of you did that, but those back row sitters, I know that we are Episcopalians, but I invite you to come as close as you are comfortable. So thank you so much.
Third Sunday of Advent. We're going to be celebrating joy today as we are preparing for the birth of our beloved Christ.
So these days we're all maybe remember reading children's books to our kids, or we're reading them ourselves, which is what I really like to do. So I'm sure many of you have read the children's book Polar Express. And for those of you who haven't, the story is about a young boy the night that one of his friends tells him that Santa Claus isn't real. And that night when he goes to bed, he ends up taking a really adventurous trip to the North Pole, where he not only meets Santa, but receives gifts from him. So I'm going to read to you a very small piece of this book that sets the tone for our class this morning. On Christmas morning, my little sister Sarah and I opened our presents. When it looked as if everything had been unwrapped, Sarah found one last small box behind the tree. It had my name on it. Inside was the silver bell. There was a note. Found this on the seat of my sleigh. Fix that hole in your pocket. Signed, Mr. C. I shook the bell. It made the most beautiful sound my sister and I had ever heard. But my mother said, "Oh, that's too bad." "Yes," said my father, "it's broken." When I'd shaken the bell, my parents had not heard a sound. At one time, most of my friends could hear the bell, but as years passed, it fell silent for all of them. Even Sarah found one Christmas that she could no longer hear its sweet sound. Though I've grown old, the bell still rings for me, as it does for all who truly believe.
Metaphor, with the bell being a metaphor for that divine spark of joy that leaps out in all of us in those moments. And the question really is, where does that joy go as we get older? Why can't we hear that bell anymore? So I thought it might be fun this morning to maybe answer that question for ourselves. And we're going to invite you into a short and easy practice to play with our imagination and to see if we can still hear the bell. So it'll be short, and there's no right or wrong way to do this. And I'm going to invite us into a state of quiet, and then I'm going to take you through a variety of scenarios. And all you really need to do is relax, stay open, and allow your imagination to soar like perhaps you did when you were a child. Okay? So I'll invite you when you're ready to close your eyes and begin to connect to your breath. Noticing how your breath feels this morning. Noticing your feet on the ground, feeling supported. Letting your body relax, your shoulders relax, your jaw relax, and begin to notice how you're feeling. Take some nice, deep breaths, connecting to yourself and grounding. And when you're ready, I'm going to ask you to connect to your imagination in however your imagination shows itself to you. Imagine that you are walking down a hallway. Any kind of hallway, it doesn't matter. Let your imagination show you. Until you reach a door. When you are ready, stand in front of that door and open it up and walk into a room full of kittens and puppies. Notice how it feels to be in this room. And now I would like you to change this room to be full of porcupines. Notice how that feels. Now the room changes again and you are surrounded by your favorite flowers. The room is fragrant. Let yourself wander, caress the flowers, and engage all your senses. And now the room is changing again. The room is now going dark. And the only source of light is a small window. How does it feel to be in this room? Now change this room again. And this time, change it to show you a childhood memory where you believe you were your most joyful. Spend time in this memory remembering. Wander the room and notice. And now notice as the room changes again into a beautiful meadow. There are fields of grass that extend into the horizon. And you look up to see a beautiful bright sun. Bask in the sunlight. And in the far-off distance, there is a bell ringing. Can you hear it? Notice how this feels. Now I'm going to invite you to just take a moment to remember how each of these scenarios felt on the inside. What emotions did you connect to? Take a snapshot of the moments of joy and how joy felt and feels. And when you're ready, you can draw yourself gently back into this space. How did that feel? To go back and experience some joyful memories, juxtaposed with not so joyful, just to give us a sense of joy versus no joy. Did it invoke anything in particular? I mean, I think it's different to experience joy than to read, right? We've been reading all week the words of Henry Nouwen, which are beautiful. But can we connect with our own joy?
I noticed that joy had a physical sensation. For me, there was a lift and almost anticipation involved with it in the different circumstances that you put us in. So for me, I hadn't thought so much about the physicality of it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And where in your body is that?
It was above the stomach, kind of it was in my heart area.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah.
Does your heart open with that, do you think?
Yeah, yes. I mean, we were only there for a second, so I think
Yeah.
it was headed in that direction.
Yeah.
What about you guys? Yeah, Steve?
I'm struggling with this memory of going downtown to Wanamaker's to see a concert, and nearby to Strawbridge and Clothiers to see Santa Express. They are not clear in my mind, but I must recall that the joy was the trip, the excitement of the trip, not the details of it.
Right.
So the anticipation, right? Yes. So the anticipation,
Yeah.
which I think Nouwen pointed to in one of the quotes today or this week, was this staying open to the anticipation, the expectant waiting, which of course is what this season is all about. Thank you. I know for me, when I was creating this, the memory that comes up for me is after church on Sundays when I was little, my dad used to take the four of us to this store called Captain's Cupboard, and we could choose any chocolate bar we wanted. And I still, to this day, the joy of the anticipation of choosing that chocolate bar is probably one of my greatest, most joyful memories.
I think one of the things to think about is that joy that if you were able to dig around inside during this little exercise and connect with it, is how rarely or how quiet it can be, and that we may not even notice that we're having it, but we could choose to pay attention to that little, whatever that it is for us that happens in our body. And noticing it will help us to let that joy infuse through us, and maybe carry it with us into moments that might not be so obviously joyful, is something. So we can notice
We can notice, yes.
Yeah.
And that helps us with choosing joy.
It does help us with choosing.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, I hope you like that. We're going to turn now in the handouts, and I don't know if you still have them, but they're about. So we've been working with Henry Nouwen for the last. This is our third week with him, and he's a great, more modern mystic and contemplative. And so Lee and I pulled 4 quotes from that longer list in your handout that we're going to work with today, because it's felt like we needed more space for more conversation from you guys. So Lee, do you want to read the first one?
Sure. Joy is not the same as happiness. We can be unhappy about many things, but joy can still be there because it comes from the knowledge of God's love for us. Joy does not simply happen to us. We have to choose joy and keep choosing it every day. It is a choice based on the knowledge that we belong to God and have found in God our refuge and our safety, and that nothing, not even death, can take God away from us.
So I will confess that we planned ahead, so I do have a few thoughts on this. And then we'll get your more knee-jerk reactions. So for me, this quote is important because it shows that joy isn't just an emotion that we feel when we're so excited to go to Wanamaker's or to the candy store to get the chocolate, that it is an element of who we are. And I think that the moments of going to Wanamaker's or to the candy store to get the chocolate, those are bringing up something that's really essential to how God made us to be, so that we are each given this core of joy within us, and that we can choose to tap into that really at any time, no matter what the circumstances are, so that this is the spark that God gave us as a gift. And then the fact that that's so elemental to who we are makes me think that, okay, so we're created in the image of God, and it starts me thinking, well, okay, God is love, but God might also be joy. And then I was thinking about the Genesis story, and God's making the heavens and the earth and the seas, and each moment he says, and it is good. And then it makes me think about when he created each of us in this room and that are watching this class on the live stream, that God chooses to create and God chooses to love God's creations, and that and in the moment when he made each of us, he said, and it is good, and took such joy in that creating. And then Nouwen, who you may or may not have read many of his works, but in a lot of his writing, he talks about us creatures being co-creators with God. So we're co-creating our lives and our persons with God. And so we have the moment to pause and take joy in every time that we participate in creation, and feel joy and choose to feel joy with that. So, and creating doesn't necessarily, at least for me, mean art or crafts or anything like that. It could be when I'm teaching a class, or when I'm listening to a friend in a spiritual direction session, or even just having a conversation on a walk with a friend. So you don't have to get all thinking, well, if I'm not creative, then I can't share in creation. It's really the little moments of your life that you're creating.
We actually had we had an email come in,
Super.
and a reflection from how it felt during the guided meditation. Mary let us know that it felt like light warmth, yet physical lift, is what she said.
Did she say light warmth?
Light warmth and
Beautiful.
physical lift. Yeah.
A physical lift?
Lift.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, it is a physical lift to feel joy. Yes, thank you. I love how we're noting the physicality of this expression of joy.
So what kind of creating makes you feel joyful in your lives? What is it that you do that leaves you feeling joyful? Anybody? It's a nice war.
For me, it's really anything where there isn't fighting involved. So I have 4 kids, and whenever we do something, it either goes well or it doesn't. And sometimes it's really just a mix of that. The kids will say, like, what do you want for Christmas? I'm like, you do not argue the whole day. And they're really good kids, but they still are, there's 4 of them, and there's dynamics there that they get under each other's skin here and there. I'm like, that's just all I want. And it's a choice, right? It's a choice to be aware of what you're doing and how you're being, and just make that good choice. And I also definitely believe that joy is a choice, and I think that circumstances, some make it easier than others, for sure. But at the end of the day, there's a quote, 99% of life is what 1% of life is what happens to you, and the other 99% is your choice about it. So I think that it's so important to choose joy. One of our children, who I won't name which one, but tends to find, it's a bit cynical, and tends to find something wrong with kind of everything. And it's stop seeing that and see the other 99%, you know? So just, for me, creation and doing things, as long as there's some like level of peace to it, it doesn't even matter what it is.
Right. It can be tiny, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The joy of peace. It's so subtle, right?
Or not so subtle when the kids are little.
Thank you.
Vincent, do you have thoughts?
So what I got out of the reading was that it is a choice, and it kind of occurred to me that quite often maybe we're expecting joy to come without choosing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like from some sort of external force, right? That's
Yeah.
going to give us joy.
Yeah,
Yeah, and now it really was clear this week about this internal source that is always with us.
yeah. So
we
we
can-
have to request it. We have to be present to it.
Oh, that's the
Coming in.
point.
Yeah.
We have to ask for it.
Yeah.
Ask for it, recognize it, right? In all its different forms.
And not be passive. And if it's not there, then ask what's missing. And maybe what's missing is that we're not requesting it, or we're not choosing it.
Yeah.
Or maybe we're just focused on the lack, and we haven't broadened our field of vision to include all that is there, even though part of it might be not what we imagined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you so much. And thanks for bringing up the asking.
I know.
It's so important to ask.
Anybody else? Anybody out there on the live stream?
Yes, actually.
Oh, thank you.
So, it says the subject line is joyful acts, walking in nature or playing the piano.
Making music. That's good. Walking in nature is a big one for me. I know, Steve, that's a getting outside for you.
Yeah. So knowing what brings us joy and to choose to do that, right? Yeah.
Great.
Beautiful.
Well, we'll go on to our next quote. It's a shorter one. I'm sorry that I don't know where it is, but it starts with, Jesus always promises joy, if you're working from the handout. The first one. There we go. Thanks. Jesus always promises joy. Joy is a free leaping toward the unexpected, a lifting up of what is new, a reaching out to heaven in hope, a touching of the kingdom, an expectant tiptoeing. He's a really good writer, Henry.
He's
now
such
in
a
this.
good writer. I love this quote. I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, first of all, because Jesus is promising us joy, right? I mean, we could sit up here and talk about you have joy in you till the cows come home, but Jesus is promising this to us. So we love Jesus. We trust Jesus. It's in us. So how do we uncover that? And Nouwen is pointing to this beautifully, I think, in this quote, because he's saying, right, leap toward the unexpected, lift up what is new, reach out to heaven. So it's this idea of opening ourselves up. Because what's the opposite of everything he's describing? Like, what is that? Yeah.
Emily said separation.
Separation, which is caused by
Just not being connected into, I think what I would say is that I'm someone who is always trying to create the space for people to come into. So sometimes I'm trying to manufacture what I want their joy to be. And so I think what I liked about that tiptoeing in was the invitation to me to get out of my own way and just sort of approach in a way that is filled with awe that I don't always allow myself to do, because I'm so busy kind of as a, it's like Susan was saying, like you're just trying to create these moments and these places for your family, and then when they don't always cooperate the way you were hoping, then you're like, you're supposed to love this and be filled with joy because I wanted you to feel joy. Now I'm really frustrated. Why don't you, so it's just how do we not try to manufacture joy?
Yeah, it's like we start to create these stories of how life should be.
Yeah.
Instead of being in the moment of life itself.
And I think a lot of it is people expect others to make that situational joy for them. I had a friend who has not been here as much in the past 18 months, and they're like, the church needs to do more to get people to come back. And I said, no, you just need to come back. Like, the church is still here.
Yeah.
It's here as it always was, with the exception of a piece of cloth over your face. Like, just come back. And I think that is not just situational to right now, it's life. Like, what is so-and-so doing for me? It's like the, JFK, like, ask not what your country could do for you, ask what you can do for your country. It's for everything. Like, stop looking at what other people aren't doing for you and go out there and seek it, because it's everywhere, I think.
That's such a great point. Like, our own personal responsibility and our own joy. Like, we have responsibilities to ourselves in this, and to show up for ourselves.
This might be the most trivial example of all, but I remember in my, it was my late 20s or my early 30s, Jim would know, but I decided that, like, birthdays, I always love birthdays, and I had a birthday where I was waiting for the birthday to happen, and then it occurred to me that I could wake up in the morning on my birthday and it could be my birthday, and everything would be awesome because it was my birthday. And ever since then, it's the best day of the year because I wake up and everything's great. And one year it poured rain, and it wasn't really, no one would have looked at it and said, wow, what a fantastic day you've got for your birthday, but it was still a really awesome day because I brought the joy.
You chose it.
I did. I picked it.
I love it.
What about leaping into the unknown? Because that's not something most of us tend to do. Do we leap into the unknown for joyfulness? What do you usually do when the unknown is looming?
Well, personally, I can feel a lot of fear around that.
Yeah?
Yeah. And a closing in, which I think you were alluding to earlier, that separating out, right? But the soul wants to leap. The soul wants to leap with joy. So how to normalize staying open in those moments where fear might close us down?
So joy, fear, kind of playing around with that too.
How does that feel?
Hello? The opposite of joy for me isn't fear. For me personally, it's anxiety. Like, just this unknown creates these just gathering loads of questions about playing out every possible scenario. If this happens, this is how I could react. And it's not fun, it's not joyful. And so, he's really big on being like, it's whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Like, you worry about it isn't going to change it at all. But it's easier said than done for me personally.
As a former chronic over here, I'm reformed.
I'm reforming. That's a good point, that joy and anxiety. But it is also important to know that even, I think, as someone who's working on the worrying, that even in the worrying, there's joy there. I think that was kind of what Vincent was getting at, was that it doesn't have to be the world's most awesome setting for you to expand a little bit, to find some joy. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. All right. Want to move on?
Sure. Okay, so our third quote is, celebration belongs to God's kingdom. God not only offers forgiveness, reconciliation, and healing, but wants to lift up these gifts as a source of joy for all who witness them. In all three of the parables that Jesus tells to explain why he eats with sinners, God rejoices and invites others to rejoice with him. Rejoice with me, the shepherd says. I have found my sheep that was lost. Rejoice with me, the woman says. I have found the drachma I lost. Rejoice with me, the father says. This son of mine was lost and is found. All these voices are the voices of God. God does not want to keep his joy to himself. He wants everyone to share in it. God's joy is the joy of his angels and his saints. It is the joy of all who belong in the kingdom.
So the reason we chose this one was because I think it's great for us to see that Nowen is grounding his writings on Scripture, and I love how he's turning to Jesus's parables here to show that joy grows infinitely when it's shared, because God's joyful that the sheep is found, the coin is found, the son has returned, but God doesn't contain God's joy for God's self. It kind of explodes out of him, and we all share in that. And as I sort of pondered this quote over the last couple of days, I was thinking about where it was an experience in my life where there was so much joy that it literally leapt out of me, and then when I shared it, it got even better. So I'll tell you a little story, because it appalled my 3 children. But we were on a whale watching trip, and we were so lucky because we wound up alongside of a blue whale. We were on one of our kids, we took them each on a trip when they graduated from high school. And so I didn't know how much I love whales, and it's a lot, and there was much joy, and it exploded out of me, and I wound up sharing it with many complete strangers on the same side of the boat with me, and there were more than one of us in tears of joy for this experience, and my kids literally were pulling at me, "Ma, you're so embarrassing, this is horrible, why are you talking to these people?" But I think that I and all of the strangers bonded in that moment and were much more joyful because we were sharing it with one another. So that's my little story. So even it can be embarrassing, but sharing your joy makes it more joyful.
It just radiates, right?
Well, it pops right out.
Pops out, yeah.
There's a comment online that sort of is related to that.
Is it one of my children?
They're giving me cues on when to turn off the microphone, yes. It says, sometimes joy is gifted when we aren't expecting, that God finds us where we are. So,
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's great.
Yeah, and if we were expecting it, we wouldn't maybe experience it, right? Yeah.
Anybody else have a moment where your joy increased by the sharing of it? I know you have.
Well, I know for me, I have this huge laugh, and there have been times where my laughter has turned an entire room of a restaurant into laughter. So, and then people come over and tell me that my laugh made their day. So, that's it coming right back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Full circle.
If you're parents, I think that Christmas, when giving gifts to your children, just seeing that joy comes right back. So the joy of giving. Anything else? Anybody out there on the live stream? It's funny not to see you.
I know. Should we move on to our fourth?
Mm-hmm. Sure. All right, well, we will move on to our fourth and final quote that we're going to highlight today. The beauty. Susan, do you know where it is? The beauty and preciousness, which one that is? Tuesday. So the beauty and preciousness of life is intimately linked with its fragility and mortality. We can experience that every day when we take a flower in our hands, when we see a butterfly dance in the air, when we caress a little baby. Fragility and giftedness are both there, and our joy is connected with both. So fragility and giftedness are both there, and our joy is connected with both.
How does this quote feel for everyone? I mean, I know I love it because Nowen is pointing us to the subtleties of joy, right? So Amy was just talking about expansive joy, and this is now bringing us back into those subtle moments, those moments that take us in the unexpected ways. We caress a baby, we see a butterfly, and somehow we're so connected to that present moment that we see the gift of God right in front of us. And I don't know how all of you feel, but those are the moments that I can find myself crying and my heart bursting open with gratitude. And behind that is this subtle joy of just being alive in this beautiful universe.
We had a comment online that said, what you turn to during the pandemic is probably something that gives you joy.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
If you're still listening, can you tell us what you turned to joy in the pandemic?
It'll take a minute for that to come
Yeah,
in, but I'll let you know.
There's a little bit of a lag.
Yeah.
Has anybody had those moments where it was so subtle and beautiful that it took you to tears?
Crier, like I'm a happy crier, daily. But when I woke up in our new house and looked out the window, we used to live on a really busy road that had no view, and now we live on a quiet cul-de-sac that has a tree outside the window. And I remember waking up the first morning and looking outside at the tree and just losing it. And my kids are on each side of me, like they're all four in there. He would too. But just being overwhelmed with the peacefulness of it. Because I think that if you can't find joy in everyday stuff, then you just can't be joyful, because your life isn't filled with huge moments and huge trips and Christmas mornings and birthdays every day, you know? So if you can't find it in the small things, then again, it's a choice if you have to look for it.
You know, you've quoted two other people here. I'd like to quote Susan Barber. If you cannot find joy in the everyday things, then you cannot be joyful.
Yeah,
write that
beautiful.
down, girlfriend.
That's just beautiful.
Someone was responding to your laughter, and it says, "Isn't God in laughter?"
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, another one. Definitely, joy of God is in beauty and our moment of compassion.
Yeah, it opens up compassion. Oh, yes. It's so rich, right? These moments where we open up our hearts and compassion flows and gratitude flows and joy flows. I mean, this is who we are. This is what we are given.
Yeah, Karen.
I'm remembering sitting in this church some years ago after a service and talking with a woman with whom I had a very complicated relationship, a good relationship, but a very complicated family relationship. And for whatever reason, I don't know, she started talking about the difference between joy and happiness. And that was a concept that I had not really thought about and coming from a somewhat unexpected source, and a source that I respected immensely. And not too long after that, within the next year or so, she died. She wasn't someone who I saw on a regular basis, but I have always remembered that. When I hear the word joy, I remember that conversation and how valuable it was, in that, to me, it was a revelation of something joyful about which I had not given any previous thought.
How would you sort of describe the difference between joy and happiness for you?
I think that there was a richness to me, as the way she talked about it and the way we talked about it was happiness being an underlying element, and joy being that moment of revelation of something that was newly revealed to you in kind of a special way. And then it became part of an underlying source of constant happiness that's always there, if not always present, if not always visible.
I think you're bringing back up the idea that we can choose to see it, that we need to keep our eyes peeled for it.
Yes.
And I love how you pointed to it's always underlying, right?
Yes.
So we can keep tapping into that.
And this woman was, once again, someone with whom I didn't have conversations all the time or very often. As I said, it was a complicated relationship, but I thought that was somewhat God-given. That was a God-given element of that day, that moment, that conversation that we had, and the fact that she would, totally unexpected to me, be someone who would share that thought with me was a God-given moment.
Yeah, it's a gift.
It's beautiful. It's grace.
Thank you.
We're coming to the end of our time.
Wow, that went fast.
That went really fast.
When you're joyful.
I would say one thing. I'm always taken by how joy usually comes in the reflection of other people, not so much that they created it for me, but I have found most of my deepest joy comes when there's some incarnate experience. And so I think that that's why it's so beautiful. We're talking about this now during Advent when we're waiting for the second person of the Trinity, the incarnate part, the person that we can really be in a relationship with. So I love that. I love to see the joy reflected in other people, I think is what brings me the greatest personal joy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So our invitation to you this week is keep your eyes peeled for the joy. Choose it, ask for it. It's there. It's there, even in moments where you might feel a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, listen for the bell.
That's good callback. Read the Polar Express. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.